there. But it depends crucially on mobility, right? People must be able to move cheaply to the best area, and the value of the good to people must be relatively independent of the location. Otherwise, it's going to be too costly for them to move towards it, right? But in some sense, this essentially makes it excludable, right? Because you can keep people from moving into or get them to move into the place, right? It also makes it a bit rival because there are only so many people who can live in an area or go to a school. So in some sense, this is not really a solution for like real public goods. What it really does is limits the scope of what we should think of as public goods or potential ways of making public goods private goods, but it doesn't really solve the problem for truly public goods like national defense or things that lots and lots of people are going to be using. Okay, so the most famous solutions to public goods problems were proposed by two Swedes, Lindahl and Weyl. And they imagined projects, they imagined ways of trying to get private funding for public goods. And let me take the simplest example, which is imagine we're going to build or not build a project, a binary public good decision. But all of these principles can sort of be extended beyond that. Each citizen gets a value VI from buying the good, and there's a cost C of undertaking the project of buying it, right? So one natural thing you could do is you could ask everyone to pay a share of the cost, which is equal to the share of the value that they're going to get. That's called the Lindahl price for the good. Now, notice that if the good is efficient, if it's efficient to create it, if capital V is greater than C, then that also means that everyone's little vi is going to be greater than vi over capital V times C, right? Because we just multiplied both sides by the same number. Okay, so based on that, Jack, do you remember what Lindahl and Weyl's mechanism says we should do to fund the public good?
No.
Anyone else? Yeah, Dan.
Well, if it's socially beneficial, then every individual person benefits from it. So you can just do unanimous consent.
Yeah.
And it works perfectly. Everyone either agrees or everyone agrees it's not worth it.
Yeah, exactly. So we can just assign people these Weyl shares, and then we can just ask everyone, do you all consent to the good being built? So there's no coercion necessary there, and there's no free riding problem, because everyone knows that if they say no, then the whole thing's off, right? Because everyone is therefore pivotal in the decision, so everything's good. This is called the Lindahl pricing equilibrium or Weylian unanimity. Now the question is, would this really work in practice? And my guess is that it wouldn't for a few reasons. Neil, do you have some idea about why this might not work?
With large numbers of people, getting everyone to agree is going to be very tough.
Yeah, I mean, if we truly knew everyone's share of the values, then that wouldn't be a problem, right?
Sure, right, so even finding everyone's share of the values.
Exactly.
Public goods require some people right to lose, or no, are we saying, like everyone can succeed? Like everyone can, it can be beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, it is going to be beneficial to everyone if we know the right shares of the cost to assign to everyone.
Oh, okay.
But the problem is, as I think you're right to say, it's going to be very hard to estimate everyone's share so precisely that we're willing to take the chance that even if one person we got wrong, that could blow the whole system up, right? So first of all, it might not be credible, right? It might not be credible for us to say, look, if any single person says no to this, we're not going to do it. Because it seems unrealistic. You know, if one person says no, we would probably say, oh, well, we just estimated that one person's wrong. Let's adjust theirs down. But as soon as you do that, then everyone has an incentive to say no. But even if you could commit to it, the basic problem is that you might not know everyone's values, right? And imagine that we only have an approximate sense of people's values, right? Then even if there's a very low probability that for any individual person, their value is below the share of the cost that they're assigned, because we did a very good job of estimating things, when there's a ton of people, the chance that one person has that is very high, right? And I think that's why it's hard to imagine using this thing. because there's almost always going to be one unpredictably stubborn person. So imagine that we tried to do holdout things by saying, look, take it or leave it offer, here's what you're getting for your land. People wouldn't have an incentive to claim that they value their land more than they do, right? Because it's a take it or leave it offer. But there's almost certainly one person who you underestimated how much they valued it at, and who would say no and ruin the thing for everyone else, right? And we can study this formally by crunching the numbers. So imagine that people have values vi, and as far as we know, their values are all drawn from the same distribution. We don't have any way of knowing anything specifically about individual values. These values maybe don't have that much spread in them, right? But we don't know exactly what they are, right? So then the probability that any individual is going to reject the offer is going to be the probability that they have a value below their share of the cost over n, right? So the probability any individual consents is 1 minus that. The probability everyone consents is 1 minus f of that to the n power, right? And suppose that we're able to get the probability that anyone says no as low as 1/10 of 1%, right? That sounds really, really low, right? So only 1 in 1,000 people would object, right? But once we have 1,000 people, we already are down to only 35% chance of getting this thing created, even though 99.9% of people are in favor of it. Once you're at a small town size of 10,000 people, you're less down to 1 in 20,000 chance, right? It turns out that if people don't all have the same distribution of values, you can improve this a little bit by working with the elasticities of people's demands and charging more to the people who are more elastic or willing to pay more. But still, you're going to sort of run into this problem inevitably, right? And this isn't just true of this simple offer. We could, in principle, say to people, well, maybe you value it more. Why don't you pay a little bit more if you turn out to value the thing more? But any scheme like that is going to lead people to understate their valuations, right? So one way we run into the fruit rider problem, one way we run into the unanimity problem, any combination of those runs into some version of the same problem, right? So basically, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. And this is a fundamental theorem, very much like Cournot's theorem, and that sort of extends it to this more general way of thinking about things. So this is called the Malath and Postal theorem. It says, if everyone must consent to their funding of a project and no external funds are available, then the probability of the project undertaken goes to 0 as the number of people gets large. Yeah, Mohammed.
I didn't see how these external funds could help, because even without external funds, the value of making projects could be like higher, or even if we introduce like double, if we can find double of that size of value from external funds, still that changes the probability of each person from 99 to 99.5 or 99.9, and still that.
Because if you get an external funds equal to C, then you're fine, right? Because then you don't need to ask anyone to contribute anything.
Oh, I was just looking at the problem of like buying the lands, for example, and
yeah, but imagine
hold out. So I didn't see how external fund can solve that problem. Like, even I offered them like 10 times the whole value.
So
maybe
then the idea is, I mean, imagine people have values on some. If there's some maximum value that any person could have, then if we get enough that it's equal to that. But if there's no maximum value, then yeah, you're right. We would still run into this problem. Yeah, Daichi.
So I guess the point is that you're going to have to use coercion, but
yeah.
I feel like you can use like a smaller extent of coercion. Like say if 90% of the people agree, then you can like sort of squeeze out the rest of the 10% and go through. So it's still sort of democratic, like, to a high degree, but
yeah, we're going to be talking about stuff like that, but still you're going to have to use some coercion then. And you're going to sacrifice some efficiency if you require 90% of people to agree. Because there could be lots of cases when it's efficient, and yet you can't get 90% of people to agree, right? So there's going to be a trade-off between respecting property rights and efficiency. Yeah, go ahead, Neil.
Is it also coercion if it's the other way, where some people are going to freeload, and you basically just make it so their expectation is that they won't be allowed to freeload?
Yeah.
They're never actually coerced to pay money, but they just believe they would be or something. Or well, they don't believe.
Yeah, so there's a shadow of coercion there.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, everything is usually a shadow of coercion, right? Like, what is it? If I put a gun to your head, I haven't shot you yet. I'm just threatening to shoot you. You know what I mean? So.
But it wouldn't even have to be to be forced to pay. It would just be that the project may not go through, right? So it's not even like that's still the same.
No, but that is genuinely non-coercive. That the project wouldn't go through, but
it does go through. We leave like let's say 5% of people don't pay. It still kind of works out if we.
Yeah, but then people have an incentive to underreport.
Sure.
There's no way out of this bind.
Sure.
Yeah. So, so therefore, we always run into this collective action problem. Public projects, either good or bad, are going to always require coercion. And we did it for a binary case, but it's true more broadly. And coercion can basically operate in two ways, right, given what we just said. The first is you can force people to consent, right? This allows us to overcome the basic problem. When people are coerced, the probabilities don't start compounding like this because we don't need to get everyone to agree, as Daiichi was saying. Second way is we can raise external funds. But where do these funds come from? From the sky? I mean, we probably have to coerce someone to give us those funds, right? So both strategies involve some sort of coercive tax-raising power. And Neil, what is the nature of that coercive power that's most often used in the case of eminent domain? Or in the case of land assembly? Well, what's the coercive power when we're trying to assemble land? What is the coercive power the government has that it usually uses to assemble land?
The fact that it officially owns the land or something? Like you have to, no?
Yeah, you're getting close. Anyone else know the?
Don't they like pay people for the land?
Yeah, but they can pay them whatever they feel like paying them, right? Or they can pay them whatever the court deems to be fair, right? So there's something that says, so one way you can do it is you can have public goods funded by taxing beneficiaries, right? Local communities raise property taxes, cities raise general revenue from any services, and that's the way that a lot of public goods work. There's also coercion used in public bads. So in particular, the government has the right, if there's a public purpose, to come and take your land, and they have to pay you some, quote, just compensation, unquote. But that's basically just whatever a court, which is probably pretty connected with the government, thinks you deserve, right? And this is usually determined by what's called the fair market value of the land, which is like what some real estate agent, who maybe is being paid off by the government, assesses the land to be worth. But even if he's not being paid off by the government, the truth is that if you valued your land only at its fair market value, you already would have sold your land, right? So the fact that you're living there means that you probably value it more than its fair market value. Yeah, Neil?
Can that be compensated for by like making it the same value that they're taxed on?
Yeah, so one way that you can try to do this is there's an interesting mechanism that Neil's referring to where you tell people that you can report your own value for your land, and you'll be taxed on that value, but then the government will always have the right to take your land at that value as well, right? And if you make the